Hello, this is Paul Ricci. I'm with, oh, oops, sorry, I meant to share the screen. Okay, yes. Hello, this is Paul Ricci with Allegheny Independent Media. Today I have an interview with State Treasurer candidate Erin McClelland. She will be, she's, working diligently, to as a candidate, and the primary's coming up. I forget, what day is that, the primary?
Uh, yeah, it's April 23rd.
April 23rd. Okay, well, and yes, Miss McClellan, Miss McClellan, yes, she's been active in politics for a long time. She ran for Congress twice against Keith Rothfus. And, I guess she was mentored by Paul O'Neill, and I will let her describe the rest of her, well, Paul O'Neill, not the baseball player, but the former US treasurer under the Bush administration. So, okay, I will let her so can you tell us like about yourself and your platform?
Sure. I was born and raised in a great little working class steel mill town in the outskirts of Allegheny County, where I still live today. I come from four generations of organized labor, and I think there's about 5,000 steel workers just in my backyard alone. So that describes a lot about where I come from. I have a master's degree in industrial organizational psychology. I actually started the state's first licensed mental health and drug and alcohol program of its kind. It was a very holistic model that we were very proud of. Was featured twice in Industrial Engineer magazine for that. Um, Served as an opiate expert on the 25 Cities initiative done by the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy in Pittsburgh. And yes, I was with the Institute of Research, Education, and Training in Addiction, where we worked in conjunction with efforts that former Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill was doing on medical error and hospital acquired infection. So I did learn a lot about looking at big government systems and solving problems within them from the work that we did alongside of his organization. So that experience gave me a great deal of reverence for the idea of what the treasurer does, and really opened my eyes to some of the new things that we could possibly do moving forward and expanding the office. So that's why I decided to run.
Okay, and who is the current treasurer?
The current treasurer is a Republican named Stacey Garrity. She got that seat in 2020.
Okay, so yes, in presidential election years are years when the state row offices are up for election.
Correct.
So, okay, and I noticed in your like on your website that yeah, you're looking at like ways to improve like supply chain issues, like
Yeah, there's
supply
a lot of
chain.
things. Yeah, there's a lot of things that interest me. The treasurer has contract oversight. So with a lot of the supply chain innovations that Joe Biden has done, I would love to see those built into how we do procurement in the state level. So when we're buying solar panels for the Solar for Schools bill, I want to make sure they're not manufactured in the Xinjiang province of China by 1.2 million people that are in slave labor camps, or mined in the Congo by conflict mined slavery. So, like, those are values that I have coming from a working class background that I think the treasurer can do a lot more to work on. And that's an interest for me. I'm also very interested in expanding small community banking. The Biden administration has a wonderful program on mission driven banking that they offer through the FDIC. There's capitalization available, there's a framework, and we could be getting that money and starting small community banks in our unbanked and underbanked communities. So you're looking at not only the inner city, but rural working class communities where there may be a shortage of local banks. So that's something that interests me. But really, top of my list is cybersecurity. Right now, we have hacks coming in from all over the state. The Aliquippa Water Authority was hacked by Iran, and they, I
Wow.
guess, for a short period of time, got a hold of the operations for their water supply, which is very dangerous. The Washington County government was shut down for a pretty lengthy period of time. I think it was well over 2 weeks as they were in a ransomware negotiation that cost them $350,000. And then Chester lost $400,000 in a phishing email scheme. So this is a huge issue. The Treasury does have their own cybersecurity program, and I think it's really important that the treasurer take on that effort. And the National Association of State Treasurers actually agrees that that is a responsibility that our treasurers need to start taking on at the state level and supporting all of those nearly 2,600 municipalities we have throughout the state.
So are these hacks, are they like trying to steal money from these municipalities or just or
Well,
trying to get information?
obviously the ransomware attack was ransom, so that was money, but they got control of their entire county infrastructure and locked it down so they couldn't function at all.
Mhm.
So that was obviously about money. Chester was about money. I think that the Iran attack on Aliquippa sounded a little bit more about just terrorism. This was not long after the attack by Hamas on Israel. And in that case, they were just sort of looking for weak infrastructure. And they attacked an Israeli made software system that Aliquip was using, where they were still continuing to use the default password of 1111. So this is some pretty basic stuff that we need to start doing in order to secure ourselves. But the fact is this is the century that we live in, and this is what it's going to be like to run local government moving forward.
Yes, I mean, certainly that's very scary. Well, I mean, just about anybody can be hacked, sadly. So, okay. And some would argue, like, I guess, like maybe a novice, somebody who doesn't know a lot about politics may say, like, wouldn't you need, say, a background in say accounting or finance to work as state treasurer?
Well, I run a small business, and I have been adamantly following. I worked for the Allegheny County Department of Human Services, so paying attention to public sector pensions is something that I did a lot as part of my policy job, just because I care about workers. And what's happened to their pensions is a serious concern for me, especially our teachers. So there's that background. I've also been really aggressively following what's happened to Wall Street since the early 2000s. And the work that I did alongside Mr. O'Neill, just listening to him talk about that after he left the Treasury and what his experiences were was very informative. I did have a meeting with him when I ran for Congress about the Wall Street collapse and some of the root causes of that problem. So that's been something that I've been very interested in and followed closely. There's actually a deep dive into an invoice-backed security scheme that I wrote on my website. It was written in 2001, and it was a scam that killed hundreds of thousands of jobs and tanked companies all over the world. And the number of people that were involved in that, including the prime minister of Great Britain and elected officials all over the world that were participating in that before it went down, was fascinating. So I would argue that the experience that I've had has been more on the business end and more on the public sector pension end. But I think that those values are what really matters. We have some excellent workers in our treasury, and it's recognized for a lot of the work that it's done over the years. And I think it's about what values you bring to the office as the leader of it. So
Mhm.
that's what my executive experience is going to bring.
Okay, I know. Yes, I do remember reading about your mentor, Paul O'Neill, when he
I
had a
wouldn't call
short
him a mentor.
stint.
I wouldn't call him a mentor. He was just somebody that we closely worked with on a lot of processes,
Okay.
and I got to go to
Yeah.
his weekly staff meetings for quite a while. So I wouldn't say a mentor is somebody I think that takes a personal interaction. So I wouldn't go that far, but I did learn a lot through that process.
Okay. Well, I stand corrected.
No, that's okay.
Okay, and I know he had a short stint as Treasury Secretary in the Bush administration. I do
Yeah,
remember reading, like he was told by Dick Cheney, Ronald Reagan proved that deficits don't
don't
matter.
matter.
Like
Yeah.
he was objecting to some of their tax cuts.
Yes.
And so I guess so like was he embittered by his experience in the Bush
Um,
administration, do you know?
I don't know if I would characterize it, and I certainly didn't know well enough to know what his emotional response, but he always seemed very pragmatic about it in both the book that he wrote after and the Wall Street Journal interview that he did, where he just told the truth about what happened. And I think he came from a background long before that administration where they did briefings every morning, which they called the Brandeis briefs, and reviewed the state of the economy every day. And it was very data driven and very pragmatic. And I think that he saw that starting to die. The idea that we simply do what is right and what is based on truth and evidence. And it just seemed like a lot of that administration, what they were doing was based on political ideology. So that was how I would have interpreted that. You can read in his book or in some of the interviews he did, that it just wasn't very pragmatic. It wasn't based on data. And he was critical of the tax cuts because there was real growth in the economy at the time, but instead of doing that, they did the tax cuts to create the illusion of growth, but there was real growth. So it wasn't really necessary.
Hmm. But that, yeah, of course, it coincided with 9/11 and all that other everything else. So, okay, and so like, so I guess as treasurer, you would be working a lot. I guess maybe some people may not understand exactly what the treasurer does. I mean, I assume like, they are separate. I mean, maybe they are part of the executive branch of the state government,
Well,
but
the treasurer is what's considered a row office.
mhm,
So the treasurer just manages as far as the coffers. There's what they call the four funds, three big pension funds. 43% of the coffer
mhm,
is this teacher's pension, and then you have the state workers' pension and the municipal workers' pension. And then you have, all the rest of the tax dollars, the 529 accounts, the PA able accounts, so those types of savings accounts that are run by the state. And then you have contract oversight, controlling all the contracts that go through the treasurer's office, which are entered into a database that I think is very antiquated right now. You can't search by women-owned businesses or who's union and non-union. There's a lot of information I think we could be extrapolating from those contracts and letting people know who
certainly.
is getting government contracts and who's doing that work. And I don't think that as I've gone through that process, it's very cumbersome and it's not as informative as it could be. So that's definitely something that I would like to do. Is I'd like people to actually know a little bit more about the vendors that their state is using in their procurement process.
Okay, and so I guess, so I know that the row offices, they're all term limited, just like the governor is to 2 consecutive terms. And so the auditor general, does it serve as an oversight for the treasurer? Well, obviously for the whole state.
The auditor can audit anything in the state they choose. And as you know, our current auditor is also a Republican who has refused to audit schools for some
Oh,
reason. So
okay,
it would be really nice to replace him. And we do have two Democrats running for that seat as well.
okay, okay. I mean, I just maybe just thought I just look at it, maybe some people ordinary folks just may not understand exactly what the treasurer does or what the auditor or,
Yeah.
auditor
Yeah.
general.
The idea of the treasurer as a watchdog was a thing at one point. The first woman that
Hmm.
served as treasurer for Pennsylvania, her name was Grace Sloan. And she
Okay.
actually would refuse to write checks if things weren't being done in accordance with the law. She
Hmm.
was notorious for going to war with Milton Schaap and
Yeah.
seeing him in court quite often. And from the looks of it, and I
Okay.
just did a brief history of her, but it looks like she won a lot. And she
Okay.
took a stance about doing what was right. And I loved reading about her work
Hmm.
because she didn't care about what was partisan or party. She cared about what was right, what was constitutional, and what represented the best interest of the people. And we haven't seen the treasurer's office used that way in a long time. But if you think about it,
Okay.
so the vouchers that the state is talking about doing, and our governor has pushed. Those have to be written through the state treasurer's office. So if the treasurer finds an issue with the legislation or constitutionality or anything like that, she has the option and I would say the obligation to pursue that and make sure that that's interpreted in the courts before writing those vouchers. So I
Okay.
believe that there's another level of accountability that can be affected in the treasurer's office. We haven't really seen it done that way, but it should be. There was a time back in 2015 when the state treasurer did withhold money during a budget stalemate from the charter schools because of where the funding was coming from. And anytime that you have a budget stalemate where we don't pass our budget on time, the treasurer has an obligation to follow the law. If you don't have a budget, then there's certain checks that you can't write. There's some checks that you can't. And it's
Yeah.
really, really important, I think, for the treasurer to hold the legislature and the governor accountable when they don't pass a budget on time and they're not getting their work done. That has often fallen on the backs of the treasurer, and it shouldn't, because it's not the treasurer's job to pass the budget. It's to
Yeah.
write the checks and make sure it's implemented. But that's another criticism I have, is that a lot of times when the legislature and the governor don't get their work done and don't get that budget done in time, that blame falls on the treasurer for not writing the checks that they're legally not allowed to write anyway. So I think it's
Okay.
something that is often misunderstood.
Yeah, I guess that's the problem of like petty politics in the legislature. And yes, usually they fall
Yeah,
victim to that. Yes, my father was a state employee, and yes, he had to work sometimes when the government shut down.
yeah.
So okay, and so I guess wasn't it Barbara Hayford? I remember they had do they still have the TAP account? You know, people can put money in and, you know, for savings for their college. Do they still have that?
So we have PA 529 accounts. And
Okay.
there's two funds for that. Our 529 accounts are really phenomenal. They're one of only two gold rated 529s in the country. There's only two states that have that level. So, we're there. They're a great program. The Biden administration has come up with a lot of options to roll that over. One of the barriers for some people is, well, I'd like to put money in this, but what if I don't go to college? Then what happens to that money? Can I use it for this or that? So there have been a lot of reforms on how you can roll that money over into a retirement or a different savings account. So that's going to be a part of the job of the next treasurer, is to really make sure that people understand those 529s can be used for education materials, other training, and can also be rolled over if you choose not to use them for that purpose.
Okay. You know, I do hear regular record like, you know, like state treasurers going on the news saying there may be some unclaimed funds, you know, people may have forgotten about. And so I
Yeah,
guess so they all come to the treasurer seeing if they have anything.
yeah. So the unclaimed property, obviously, if you've had a bank account sit too long, they'll turn that money over to unclaimed property. If there's an insurance check that you forgot to cash or something like that, um, that's where it'll go. And I actually have money in unclaimed property that I've tried to get, that I haven't been able to get back. So I actually know what it looks like to be on the other side of that. Very recently, there was an article about that issue, and my Republican and my Democratic opponents were arguing about it. But the Republican said that neither of us care about unclaimed properties. I don't know where she made that assertion. She doesn't know me. We've only met one time. We've never had a conversation, but she's decided to make snap judgments about what I care about. Well, I assure you, the money that I have sitting in there, I do care about unclaimed property because I'd like my money back. So
Okay.
every treasurer campaigns on, because how can you not? It's the idea that you are giving money back to people that they probably didn't know that they had. I mean, it's as close to Santa Claus as it gets, and everybody's always working on new ways to get people their money back faster. There's people looking at ways that you can, once you file your taxes, automatically get enrolled to see, since we have your social security number, your address, to see if there's anything that matches up. The issue with any auto enrollment is always, are we going to accidentally give somebody, the wrong person, the money? So you want to make sure there's verification. Getting people in the criminal justice system, that when they go in that, auto enrolling them so that they can get that money because they probably really, really need it as they're going through that process. So it's always a great conversation. It's an easy conversation to have. Logistically, you always have to worry about fraud or giving people the wrong people somebody else's money. But I think it's a good program, obviously, and we could probably always do more to get closer to giving people their money in real time. You know, the minute we get it in, how do we get it back out the door as fast as possible? That would be my goal. That's the supply
Yeah,
chain expertise
part of
that
it. Mhm.
is I don't even want to ever see it. I want to know that it exists, and I want to find a
Yeah,
way to reach out to somebody and say, hey, this bank has your money. You know, we can be a pass through for it, but you know, I would like to get it to them immediately. That's ultimately
certainly.
the goal of supply chain logistics is real time.
Mhm. Yes, I mean, I know, of course, people started to realize how important supply chains were during the pandemic. Like certain drugs, they were being made in China and having to be brought over here. And like, wouldn't it be better just to make the drugs here?
Yeah. Well, we did find out a lot of that with the supply chain issues during the pandemic. And, you know, that was a big part of the job creation that we saw here under Joe Biden's administration was suddenly cheap labor overseas wasn't so cheap.
Yeah.
We found
Yes.
out that it can actually get very, very expensive when you can't get the things that you need because they're coming from halfway around the world. And all of a sudden, we started moving jobs back here, building manufacturing here again.
Mhm.
But along with that, you see an increase in costs. You know, when we're making it here in this country with higher wages, higher environmental standards, better materials, then the prices do go up. And that's the price we pay for being what we like to fancy as the greatest nation on earth. But if we're truly going to do that and build here, then you are going to pay a little bit more than what you would have paid if it was all coming from China or other countries where they have lower standards.
Yeah. Yeah. So certainly that's always an issue. So I do know, like, most states have, they have a balanced budget amendment. So does the treasurer play a role in, trying to make sure that, what the and the governor are proposing would balance the budget?
No, the treasurer just enforces the budget. That's up to them to negotiate that out. I mean, obviously, the treasurer can make comments, but there's no budget power other than to make sure that the bills are paid that are included in the budget. And of course, the fiscal code, which determines a lot of
Yes.
that. So, but
Yeah.
no, the budget is on the legislature and the governor.
Okay, so they're the ones that, I mean, they're the ones it's on them if they can't balance the budget.
That's up. Yeah, that's their problem.
Okay, and I do know, of course, like the entitlement programs, things like Medicaid, and other like welfare programs, of course, if, anytime the economy goes bad, you have more people, that could be a problem when you have more people coming to the government asking for help and less tax revenue coming in.
Well, those programs are federal, so I'm running in a state office, so I wouldn't have any impact on federal programs.
I mean, well, Medicaid, I did used to work in the Medicaid office. I don't know what it's like now, but usually the I mean, the federal they had to provide 55 cents on the dollar, and the state provided 45 cents on the dollar to cover each recipient. So
Mhm.
I don't know how it works now, but and usually and any time, they have to come up with the money regardless of how much tax revenue's coming in, with entitlements.
Yeah, like I said, those are all federal programs. So what I'm looking at is how we're managing the three pensions as well as the savings accounts, the medical marijuana fund that we have. All the money that
Mhm.
we make from medical marijuana goes into a single fund and is managed separately because technically marijuana is still illegal. So we have
Yeah.
to keep that separately in case a president would come in and seize the assets to keep it separate from
Mhm.
everything else, which
Yeah.
is one thing that I hope that we can stop. There is a bill that Senator Casey's done to stop that, so we can start to decriminalize marijuana and look at it as a medicinal process. So that still happens. The other thing that I'm interested in is the idea of a public bank. We've seen uh, cities throughout the country start to engage public banking, and that was another sort of after effect of the pandemic when the Bank of North Dakota, which is the only state level public bank in the country, was able to allocate CARES Act and other support funding during COVID directly and more efficiently than government agencies were able to. So I think that having at least the discussion, I know that I've done a deep dive on what it would take based on the feasibility study done in Philadelphia, but just with the first class townships in the state of Pennsylvania, you have $1.6 billion of deposits there. So if we could take those away from commercial banks, which, believe it or not, commercial banks have to hold more of that money back. They can't invest it out because it's municipal. So they have different leverage requirements and how much of that money that they can lend out and therefore make interest off of it. So we could do that and develop the financial products to better suit our schools and municipalities, because it would be our top priority, unlike a too big to fail commercial bank that's really worried about bigger and better things than servicing, a small township or borough.
Okay. And so is the treasurer, like, I know some municipalities in the state are under Act 47. Like I know my hometown, Johnstown, they were under Act 47 for like 30 years and they finally just got out of it.
Yeah.
Is that is that something the like looking at distressed communities? Is that
No,
part of
that
this treasurer?
no, like I said, no, that's not under the auspice of that office because you're just managing the money. So that would be up to the municipalities and then however the state intervenes in that process based on taking them over and getting their finances in line.
Okay. Yes, so certainly, I mean, for the average lay person, looking at finance and everything, it all seems so complicated. It
Yeah, no, it
can,
does. And one of the biggest questions I get is what is a state treasurer, treasurer of what? People don't even know
Mhm.
that that position exists. One of the big debates with the state treasurer's race right now is whether or not we should use state treasury money, pension money, to buy Israeli bonds. And both my Democratic and opponent and the Republican in the office have come out pretty aggressively for using pension dollars and state money to invest in Israeli bonds, and I have come out against it. I was very adamant that this is not normal for us to engage in nation building and supporting conflicts overseas with teachers' pensions. And that's
Yeah,
not something that I've supported. Furthermore, last year, Israel was experiencing a lot of internal conflict, and they had a massive labor strike across the entire country.
yeah,
By the summer, they had walkouts in their hospital, and then, of course, they got hit by Hamas, and shortly after that, their credit went under review. And I believe it was in January, their credit was actually downgraded, as was the credit of 5 of their banks. I also have concerns about how they're insuring their bonds and their debt. So I don't think that it's a good credit risk right now. And I don't think that we should be putting our money in foreign conflicts. I think there's lots of great
definitely.
investments
Yes.
here in this country, in Pennsylvania, to invest in. And I would rather do that, but I don't support funding wars overseas or nation building
Mhm.
or anything like that with workers'
Yeah,
pensions. I don't think it's
that's
appropriate.
that's
That's what
kind
government's for.
okay, yeah, that's kind of reminiscent of, like in the 1980s, people were arguing, yes, we should not invest in, you know, people in the US should not be investing in South Africa because of their apartheid policies. That sort of reminds me of that. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and we've
okay.
done that with apartheid. We did it with I believe Saudi Arabia. There's a number of companies or countries that we've ordered divestment in, but for the most part, we shouldn't be out putting single-handed investments in one nation. Now, you also can't support total divestment because when we put securities together in a fund, there's all kinds of different investments in there. And sometimes you will get, a small tranche of foreign bonds in there. The idea that you're going to go in there and clean out every foreign investment is just not realistic. So
Yeah.
anybody that says, and we see treasurers saying that, we have completely divested in China. No, you haven't. You absolutely have not. I guarantee you, if you start going through those prospectuses and portfolios for your funds, you're going to find some of that in there. You're going to find
Mhm.
Chinese companies and interests.
Yeah.
So that's hyperbolic and very politicized
Yeah.
part. It's becoming more and more politicized as we move forward, and I'm not a fan of it. I think that we have enough problems with people trusting government officials right now that it's
Mhm.
really important that the person managing the money be an honest broker and just tell it like it is. I
Yeah.
think that's really important. That was
Mhm.
something that Paul always said. People will forgive you if you make a mistake. They won't forgive you if you lie to them about it.
Mhm. Okay, yes. Well, certainly yeah, nobody likes to be lied to. So
No, I would
I
agree.
imagine there's not a lot of investment in countries like North Korea, but
Yeah, sure.
but yeah, I mean, certainly, I mean, oftentimes people do have knee-jerk reactions to hearing about these facts without knowing the whole story.
Sure.
So I mean, so I guess the main thing is I guess so the main thing is just to keep the investments safe and not have like a similar situation like what happened with Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers and all those other Wall Street giants.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the deregulation that we saw that brought the economy to its knees in 2008, that's all still there. I would say, and this is what I found in the deep dive I did on that invoice-backed security scheme. The only thing that catches it now is the insurance companies. If they figure out that you're playing games with the amount of money you're lending out, or how you're doing it, or how you're selling your securities, they will not insure your debt. And at that, and in this particular case, that's exactly what happened. Is the insurance company, which is called Tokyo Marine, basically pulled their insurance certificate and said, no, we're not insuring this. And that caused all their assets to freeze, and it stopped the stock scam. But that never happened, if you remember, in 2008. As a matter of fact, the biggest bailout, I think, of 2008 was probably AIG. And AIG's problem is they were insuring all of that garbage that was out there. The ratings companies were rating it AAA when it was garbage and toxic. The insurance companies were insuring it. And then they were hedging with the insurance and credit default swaps. And
Yeah.
it was completely insane. There was no accountability. There was no mitigation of moral hazard in any of that. The insurance companies have gotten much better at that. So that's what's kept us from going off the edge. But Wall Street will never stop selling us scam products. And there is a savings product that our current treasurer is pushing, which I think is horrible. It's called Keystone Saves. I call it the George W. Bush Great Recession Starter Kit. It is unregulated. It does not allow the employer to contribute to the plan. So it's not really a retirement, it's a savings account. And the Securities and Exchange Commission came out and said that this type of product is highly susceptible to fraud. And this program would be mandated on every small business in the state that doesn't offer a retirement program, which means we would be conning this savings scam onto bartenders and baristas across the Commonwealth. And the Republican state treasurer is advocating for it. My Democratic opponent voted for it in the legislature, so they have both supported this. I am fundamentally against it. I think if we want to increase savings, we can have conversations. And I have proposed a savings program that has multiple options for people depending on what they're looking at, if that's what they want to do. But I am adamantly against the Keystone Saves program. And I'm really in shock that anybody in my own party would support something so ridiculous and so
Yes.
dangerous for my worker.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yes, I know Ryan Bazzara, he does have the endorsement of the state
Yep.
Democratic Party. Well,
Yeah.
hopefully he doesn't live up to his name. So, okay.
Well,
Well,
this was an interesting year for the endorsement, because you're going to have 11 statewide candidates on your ballot, and only two of them are going to be women, and neither of the two women were endorsed by the state party. So I think
Okay.
it's interesting when we keep telling women, you're going to be 60% of your vote. We want your vote, but we don't want your voice. And that's how that all looked for me. And I think Keir Bradford Gray, the other woman running, she's running for attorney general, is an amazing and strong and powerful woman. And I
Yeah.
admire her and I give her so much credit for running.
Okay. Well, we're almost out of time. I'm going to stop recording right now.
Okay.
So.